they are one of the leaders in the world. It's not like that you are a leader in the region, but I think that from our perspective, you are in the top of among the agencies in the world. And generally, I think it's from different point of views. I think that the Sports Integrity Australia is doing really very good job. From one perspective, we have to catch and punish. From other perspective, we have to protect and support.
I think that's the importance of having athletes at the table, because it is a unique perspective. You know, it's an up-to-date, real-world perspective on what's happening with anti-doping.
I think if you're dealing with issues like bullying within your sport, you're going to be taking more risk behaviours, and that leads to making bad decisions when it comes to anti-doping.
Welcome to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Our mission is to protect the integrity of sport and the health and welfare of those who participate in Australian sport.
Hello and welcome to Onside. I'm Tim Gavel. On this episode of Onside, we'll be joined by the President of the World Anti-Doping Agency, Witold Bańka. Mr. Bańka has been in Australia for the World Anti-Doping Agency's Global Education Conference and the WADA Executive Committee meeting. We'll also be joined by the outgoing chair of the WADA Athlete Committee, former New Zealand skeleton athlete Ben Sandford, and four-time Olympic Australian water polo player, and now the National Integrity Manager for Judo Australia, Boxing Australia and Australian Taekwondo, as well as being a member of Sport Integrity Australia's Athlete Advisory Group, Bronwen, Knox. Firstly, to the President of the World Anti-Doping Agency, Witold Bańka. President Bańka, thanks for joining us in Sydney today and being our guest on Onside. What's impressed you most about the Global Education Conference here in Sydney?
Well, first of all, hello. It's a pleasure to be with you here today to discuss the important issues. Let me start by saying that I'm really very impressed with the hosts, how they dealt with the organization. It's a really amazing conference, the biggest attendance in the history of WADA when you take into account our conferences regarding education. So it's really great achievement. A lot of experts, a lot of people full of passion, engagement from different countries, different regions. So this is a really great achievement and great chance to share the views, to discuss some important matters, the role of education, the future of education in anti-doping. So very valuable conference gathering for us from WADA's perspective. So yeah, and I think it's we have to underline that the role of education. This is extremely important pillar of our policy, because our goal, I mean WADA's goal is to balance the policies. You know, from one perspective, we have to catch and punish, but from other perspective, we have to protect and support. You know. And this is this part is a education role. So this is the future of anti-doping, not to do only this, the first, you know,
not
catch and punish, exactly.
Not to police, but
so not to show anti-doping as a, and the WADA and other stakeholders as a policeman, prosecutor in anti-doping, but to show this, I would say, positive phase, but to show that the education has really extremely important role, to protect the dreams of young athletes.
Because not every country has the same focus on education, do they? And that's been one of your messages.
Yeah, and this is our goal, because now I think in the last years and months we've underlined that education is very important. That we try to convince the stakeholders, others, anti-doping organizations, that you have to increase your efforts to put education in the right place, in your policy to increase the position of education. So this is a part of our strategy for the next years, and this is our call to the stakeholders, to the anti-doping organizations. So this is one of the goals of this education, to tell people, look, to tell our colleagues from different countries, different regions responsible for anti-doping, that you have to have the same balance, between those two policies, two parts: the catch and punish, and support and prevent and protect.
Just on Sport Integrity Australia, have you been surprised by just how big their scope is now? They've gone from an anti-doping authority with RUSADA to Sport Integrity Australia, where there is a far wider remit now on integrity issues.
I think that Sport Integrity Australia works very well, and it's a valuable collaboration. I mean, from my perspective, from anti-doping perspective, we have very good collaboration with our colleagues from Australia, and it's really good work. And I think it's good then and we always support governments that are able to give more powers to the anti-doping organizations in different areas. So I think this model is working very well. I can say from anti-doping perspective mainly, because we can monitor this policy, and from this perspective, it's really good.
Are you expecting that anti-doping organisations, as they are now across the world, many of them will follow the Sport Integrity Australia model, whereby you do cover a far wider range of integrity issues, not just anti-doping?
Yes, of course, because again, it's I can say that from anti-doping perspective, from my role, I can say the anti-doping organizations should have many tools to work effectively, to be stronger, to deliver the right policy. Plus, if government wants to give more responsibilities to the anti-doping organizations, we are not against, of course not. But our role is to focus on anti-doping policy. So I can speak from this from this perspective.
Well, on that theme then, just on, I guess, the gap between countries that are very stringent, such as Australia, with their anti-doping policies, to the gap that exists with other countries that don't have the same stringent anti-doping policies. How do you narrow the gap?
True, it's I think it's the biggest challenge ahead of anti-doping environment. Not only WADA, still we have regions, countries with very weak anti-doping policy or without even right system. So what is very important is to partnership. What actually Australia is doing to help these, say, less developed regions, countries, conduct anti-doping policy. So this is what we really appreciate, when we have countries which are really keen to work with our colleagues from different regions. So partnerships, solidarity. It's very, very, very important from our perspective. How to fulfill the gap? I think it's a real big challenge. It's WADA's role. It's the role of the governments, of the sports movement to do everything what we can to convince the people responsible for anti-doping in these regions to do their job. I mean, in terms of the funding, in terms of the capacity, in terms of the many other issues. So this is the very important goal for us.
As a former athlete, have you got, I guess, a way of interpreting to a certain extent what works well with education and what works well with anti-doping, coming from that different perspective?
Well, I think it's now we are in a completely different place than in the past. When I was an athlete, the anti-doping was in a different place where we are now. I mean, when I look at the WADA, it's a big change. Now we have tools. We are much stronger than even 3-4 years ago. I mean, we are able to conduct investigations. When we received the the permission, the possibility to conduct investigations in 2016. So it's like it's a quite fresh. INI department is quite fresh body and working really very effectively and very so. Intelligence investigations, education is a completely different place than in the past. So from science perspective, the same. From funding perspective, again the budget is much bigger than in the past. I mean, WADA's budget. That's why we can do more. So yeah, I think it's as an athlete, from athlete's perspective. I'm a former athlete, but I still feel like like an athlete. I think that we can be as athletes we can be very comfortable now with the system and how we as a WADA and anti-doping community work. Of course, system is not perfect. Nobody is perfect, but and there is room for improvement, for development. So of course we have to do everything what we can to strengthen the system. But the system works much better than in the past.
You mentioned change. You've been involved with WADA through this incredible reform that has been undertaken, including the greater athlete voice. How important is that, and how far have you got to go before you think that you reach the right point?
Well, I have to honestly, at the beginning of this second phase of governance reforms, I didn't believe that we will be able to achieve these results. I mean, the whole changes, the unanimous approval from all our stakeholders. So it was a great achievement that finally we found the compromise between stakeholders, that they elaborated really good solutions. So now, yeah, with a strong athlete voice, with more independent voices in our statutory bodies, with some changes regarding ethics. I mean, now we have an independent ethics board. So from many perspectives, I think it's a really great achievement and big success. And then we are really confident that those reforms helped us to be stronger.
You've still got challenges though, haven't you? You've got professional sports that haven't signed up to the World Anti-Doping Code. You've got obviously the Russian issue. You've got obviously scientists looking to cheat the system with athletes. So there are many challenges, aren't there, coming from many directions?
Yeah, because anti-doping is not an easy business, but seriously, it's really difficult and a huge responsibility. Yeah, you've mentioned the private leagues. Yes, it's concerning issue, but well, we try to convince those responsible for anti-doping policy in the countries where the private leagues, maybe it's a good idea to join the anti-doping family, to bring more credibility to your sport. But it's not easy because the private leagues are the private. It's a private business, so they are not. Some of them are not under our umbrella because they don't want to be under our jurisdiction. But well, still we have almost 700 or even more 700 code signatories, including 192 countries. So it's really a unique system. Can you imagine that we have unified rules which applies to all stakeholders, to 192 countries and many sports federations? So it's really unique structure and great achievement that we have standards, rules, code, which cover a lot of sports and countries.
So, just on that issue though, do you feel as though you are at that point where you feel as though you are starting to get on top of anti-doping worldwide? Do you feel as though, okay, we've got this covered, we've got that covered? You've got to be vigilant, obviously, but do you feel as though you're close to getting to that point?
As I said, I think its system works well, generally anti-doping policy, but there is room for development. It's not that we are happy with everything what is going on in sport, in anti-doping policy. So it's a race, sometimes I feel it's a race with the cheats. We have to be stronger, we have to be fast, we have to be we have to have better tools to eradicate doping from sports. So as I said, rules are okay, system works, but for sure we still have to think what we can do more, how we can fulfill these gaps mentioned, during the conversation with you, and the many other issues.
Yes, a few game changes though. You've had the biological passport, you've had the reanalysis of samples from 10 years previously. So there have been incredible developments that narrow the gap.
Exactly. This is the anti-doping now. It's not only testing, as you mentioned, ABP, the long-term storage of samples. So it's a great tool. Then intelligence investigations. So and the collaboration with law enforcement. We have MOU with Interpol, with Europol. So we are working with the law enforcement, with the strong agencies that have good tools, which we don't have. It's obvious, of course, we are not law enforcement agency. So this solidarity, this collaboration between different entities is really very, very valuable for us and helpful, that we are able to share the information, share the experience, that they treat us very seriously. So it's and this is very important.
Because you've mentioned there are a couple of pillars of Sport Integrity Australia in terms of collaboration, working with law enforcement, etc. Do you see Sport Integrity Australia as being a key player going forward because they have been involved in this space for so long now? Yeah,
of course, they are one of the leaders in the world. It's not like that you are a leader in the region, but I think that from our perspective, you are in the top of among the agencies in the world with a really good strategy, with and generally I think it's from different point of views. I think that the Sports Integrity Australia is doing a really very good job.
Is there an enormous outside pressure on WADA? Do you feel you've got the Russian ban finishing on December 16, for instance, and you've got many other issues surrounding WADA? How easy is it to isolate and to focus on the job?
Business as usual. We are responsible for really important area. It's a huge responsibility on our shoulders. So I think it's normal for everyone involved. I mean, WADA's management, our employees, that we have this pressure because, I think that sport has the power to unite people, to build community. Sport plays very important role in the countries. But only clean sport. Sport without doping, without corruption, match fixing. So from our perspective, from anti-doping perspective, we have to do everything what we can to protect those values, like clean sport. So the pressure is normal because anti-doping is not only sport. It's, as you said, we are even more sometimes geopolitical organization rather than sport sometimes, because when you look at the decisions which we can take, and some of them affect not only sport, of course.
Sometimes a little bit of friendly fire too from your own anti-doping associations around the world, agencies critical of WADA's decisions and trying to put pressure on WADA too.
Yeah, but now I think that what we achieved in last month, I think that our colleagues from anti-doping community are very, very happy what we are doing, what we've changed. For instance, with the governance reforms, that we gave them more attention, that we engage our colleagues from for instance, from anti-doping organizations, that soon they will have sits in our foundation board, so they are much more involved. I think that we've done a lot in terms of the communication with them. So from the very beginning of my presidency, I've had dozens of meetings with the stakeholders, virtual, in person. So what I tried to do was to convince them, guys, we have to work together, arm in arm, hand in hand, because we have the same goals. We cannot compete. Sometimes it's fair to criticize us if you don't agree with us. You have a right to do it, of course, but do it in the right way. Okay, so and this is what I think about the collaboration. Sometimes we can disagree. It's even creative, but finally we have to elaborate compromise. We have to find good solutions because we have the same goal. So this is how I see anti-doping.
You're involved in politics in Poland. The politics of Poland, how do they compare with the politics of World Anti-Doping and dealing with various countries and sporting organisations?
Well, I think it's a different area, definitely. Yes, there are some common issues, of course, in politics in Poland and in politics, the global politics and anti-doping policy. But, well, it was, I think you can say I'm not objective because in my previous capacity I was the Minister of Sport and Tourism in Poland. But I think I've done a lot in sport in Poland. I was really proud what we achieved with my team in the ministry, and I think that one of the reasons why I became the WADA president was what I've done in Poland, because our system was at the beginning of my mission as a minister, was and it was not my fault because I started with being a minister, and then I received it's a funny story. I received the letter from WADA. Okay, minister, I was new. Your law is not. In Poland, the regulations are not in accordance with WADA standards. Can you imagine? They gave me 3 months to adjust it, to change some law, some parts of the law in Poland. So I said, oh, come on, it's very hard. If not, of course, they informed me. Yeah, if not, Poland will be non-compliant. So, well, it was tough beginning, but finally, 1 week before deadline, we've changed what they expected from us to change. Then I decided, no, we have to. It's not enough. We have to overturn the table. We have to change everything. We have to launch the Polish anti-doping agency. We have to increase the budget, and we have to, as a government, give them strong tools to be effective, to working well. So I think it was much appreciated from my colleagues from Europe and the other countries, that when I had a campaign, and I decided to be the candidate for WADA's president, I put on the table what we did in Poland. Said, look, this is what we achieved, and I think this is the clear evidence that I'm really able to be the president of WADA.
There are some big decisions to be made. Obviously, I mentioned earlier the Russia decision, December 16. It is massive worldwide, isn't it? It's not just a decision that WADA makes and that's it.
It's not easy, of course. The issue is very complicated. Now we monitor the situation very closely. Geopolitically situation is very, very difficult. The Russian invasion in Ukraine, this terrible invasion, and the war in Ukraine. From other perspective, the fact that Russian and Belarusian athletes are not competing internationally, at least majority of them. Some of them they are able to compete as a neutral, but the majority are sanctioned. So this perspective is very very complicated. But our role is to follow the CAS expectations. So we have to monitor the RUSADA. And we are doing it because we decided to, of course, to do it, not to close the open line of communication with RUSADA, because we think that war cannot create a paradise for cheats, So system anti-doping, the system, they have to operate, and test the athletes.
Just wanted to finish something obviously closer to home, because you're in Australia. And every country has their unique issues. You've got the issue of Norway, for instance, and their consent laws. Australia has its own unique challenges, but there are some positives, if I can put it that way. No positive supplement tests in Australia, 2021, 2022. What do you take away from the week that you've had in Australia?
First, though, education. If you ask me on one strong issue. I think that the global conference, it's a right example that you are the host, that you raise the role of education in Australia in anti-doping is a really good example of the area where you are very, very strong.
That's great. Thanks very much
Thank you very much
for coming to Australia and sharing your experiences, and I guess it's great to meet everybody in the flesh as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, President Bańka.
You're listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia.
We've now been joined by the outgoing chair of the WADA Athlete Committee, Ben Sandford, and Sport Integrity Australia's Athlete Advisory Group member and four-time Olympian Bronwen Knox. Bron is also the National Integrity Manager for 3 sports. Firstly, to you, Ben, you've been on the WADA Athlete Committee now for 10 years, and as you prepare to depart, do you feel as though you're on track to achieving your goal of securing greater athlete representation at WADA?
Yeah, you're right. 10 years is a long time, and it's been quite the journey along the way. And I think WADA is changing, and I think anti-doping is changing, and it's it needs to be athlete-centred, and that's a journey. It's not just a destination, and we're definitely on that journey to make WADA more athlete-centred, and to have the flow-on effect of making anti-doping more athlete-centred, and really making sure that athletes, are part of the decision-making process and do have a strong voice.
When you started 10 years ago, is it a totally different place now than it was a decade ago?
Yeah, I think so. You often lose, the where you are in the process, I guess. And I guess if I was looking back over 10 years, I think the WADA Athlete Committee is definitely a completely different committee than it was 10 years ago. I think it's treated differently by WADA, and I think it's got a different space in global sport as well.
Because I remember 5 years ago or so, you were in the midst of, being the athlete voice, and a fair bit of argy-bargy to get to the point of the athletes having some form of right and a say in WADA.
Yeah, you're right. Like, we've gone through some really difficult times, and I think that's reflective of the difficult times that anti-doping and WADA has been through. Russia and the flow-on effects from the Russian doping saga have been enormous, and we at the WADA Athlete Committee took a pretty strong line on that. And so as a result, there were implications and all sorts of ramifications through the system. Like, it's never easy when you have essentially an internal committee disagreeing with other parts of the system. And we've got through that, and hopefully we've come out the side stronger, and really been able to show the importance of having an athlete voice, and showing it not just at particular times, but embedding it, or trying to embed it right through the system.
Just on the athlete voice, we've got Bron Knox with us, champion water polo player, now an integrity manager with 3 different sports, and also on the Sport Integrity Australia Athlete Advisory Group. Bron, do you feel as though the athlete voice is starting to be heard?
It's definitely growing. I think that's the important part. It's sort of building a bit of momentum. And I think now, stepping away from my sport and not having selection hanging over my head, you can really start to champion different things and really champion that athlete voice. My sport, there's always a discretionary selection process. So whether perceived or actual, you had that threat that was there of fear of speaking out. So I think now, stepping away from that and looking back with clearer eyes, you can really see where there's space to improve and how you can really put the athlete voice forward.
When you came through in the sport, did you feel as though at times it was frustrating, your concerns weren't heard, and you were speaking almost to a brick wall? Did you find that at times, many years ago, or a couple of years ago, I guess? Yeah,
definitely. I think being a part of a few different teams, both national and professional, being told that you ask too many questions and just to trust the system, I think, and when you've seen the system fail a few times and fail some of your teammates, I think it's really hard as an athlete to sort of take, and constantly hitting brick walls and having selection and all that hanging over your head, it really makes it difficult to continue to speak up and raise concerns when you're not sure where you stand. So I think that's starting to change, and you see sports and Sport Integrity Australia start to listen, and WADA start to listen to the athlete voice and hear a different perspective and take that into consideration in their decision making.
So Ben, why is it important to have an athlete's perspective?
I think it is a unique perspective. It comes from the athletes, and athletes are looking at things through a different lens than other people around the governance table. And it's we're also in anti-doping anyway. We're also talking about the creation of anti-doping rules and policies, which have an enormous impact on athletes. The impacts of those are life-changing. The compliance that we're asking athletes to live with is enormous. And so you need, I would say, that sort of social license, or that license from athletes to do that. And athletes want to have clean sport, and the best way to do that is to involve them in those decisions, involve them in those policies, have everyone moving in the same direction, so then everyone understands what's happening, why it's happening, and out of that you will get a stronger basis for clean sport, and you also get athlete buy-in because they're heard and they have a say.
Bron, is there buy-in from the athletes now, do you think?
Oh, definitely. I think since some of the social pushes and the comms push around who's on the athlete advisory group, I've definitely had a lot more athletes come and speak to me about what we're doing and how they can get involved in some of the issues that they're facing. So I think the more that the athletes start to talk to one another, and then those of us who are in the committees or the groups that are there, that we can start raising those concerns or raising those issues.
I'll ask a question to both of you. Firstly, to you about Bron, do you think officials in suits understand the pressures that athletes face?
I think perhaps there was a time when they did, especially if they were within sport themselves. It's always interesting to see how many, especially in, say, anti-doping, who have actually walked through and participated in the anti-doping process or doping control process, because you are in quite a vulnerable position, and it'd be interesting to see how many of those decision makers have actually proceeded through that process themselves.
What about you, Ben?
It's a bit of a yes and no question. In some regards, yes, in other regards, no. And I think that's the importance of having athletes at the table, because it is a unique perspective. It's an up-to-date, real-world perspective on what's happening with anti-doping. And that's, where you get the information to know, if you're having an impact or not, and, whether athletes are believing in the system or not.
From a broader perspective, obviously Sport Integrity Australia has moved into the integrity framework, and so the scope is far bigger than simply anti-doping. Can you see that as being, you've been an athlete, you've been on the WADA Athlete Committee for 10 years. Can you see it being a natural progression for anti-doping agencies to take on that bigger remit of integrity issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a natural sort of progression for a lot of anti-doping organisations to start to move into the integrity space. They're already, working in the policy. They're already working with governments and law enforcement. They're already across sports and doing education. So it does seem to me to be a natural progression. You're seeing that also, with the International Tennis Association or Federation. They've now got an integrity unit. Biathlon's moving in that way, so sport's also moving in that way. And I think for national anti-doping organisations, that is the next step. I know in New Zealand we're heading down that path as well. And it just seems to be a natural fit, because there are a wide range of integrity issues, and one of them is doping.
And, we've seen obviously in New Zealand cycling, for instance, that's been the latest one. Before that, gymnastics seems almost crying out for some form of integrity unit, doesn't it? In a similar way that Sport Integrity Australia has developed the National Integrity Framework, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Australia's been a world leader in, working in this space and getting Sport Integrity Australia up and running, and having that national framework. I think, that's one of the first things that we'll want our integrity agency to be doing, is to develop a national framework, and then, move from there, because, wherever you look in the world, there are integrity issues, and it's really heartbreaking to see these issues sort of being repeated over and over again. So we do need, a lot more work in that space.
And Bron, you're in the coalface, at the coalface, as an integrity manager for 3 sports, a former athlete yourself. You're on the Sport Integrity Australia Athlete Advisory Group. Tell us about your life in terms of being a national integrity manager or being an integrity manager for 3 sports.
I like to think that I bring a unique perspective, having been an athlete and been exposed to some potentially questionable behaviours within sport. So I think that sort of gives me a unique understanding, but also the framework itself provides athletes with a bit of confidence that things will be dealt with independently of their sport. And I think that's a huge step forward, because previously it was dealt in-house, it was dealt behind closed doors, there was no accountability, no transparency, and you were just given a decision or an outcome or completely ignored. So I think having the framework in place and having athletes able to both anonymously and securely, either with their name or through people like myself as integrity managers, put their complaints forward, and they be dealt with in an independent sort of fashion and dealt with by people who actually understand the investigative process. Before, it's been administrators in sports who are, under-resourced and overworked and dealing with all sorts of different issues depending on the size of the sport. So having an external body that has those resources and that knowledge and that understanding can only help athletes feel more confident in the process.
And you have, in addition to your title too, don't you, complaints manager. Is that a lightning rod for people coming forward with complaints?
I think within my first week, I got a number of emails of just checking in and phone calls of trying to, I think, gauge where I sat within the sport and how I was connected. And then a few more came through, and a bit more, I think they started to feel more confident that I wasn't, while I was employed by sports, I wasn't directly engaged with them. So I think it's been seeing a different side of sport, I suppose, and it's been challenging but also quite interesting.
I guess the thing that interests me is that probably 3 years ago, the focus, I know with Sport Integrity Australia was, as RUSADA, was very much on anti-doping, now with a far wider scope. Do you feel as though anti-doping, like, I'm not saying it's not as important, but do you feel as though it's sort of in the pack now a little bit?
I think they all bleed into one another. I think if you're dealing with issues like bullying within your sport, you're going to be taking more risk behaviours, and that leads to making bad decisions when it comes to anti-doping. So I think they're quite interconnected and they bleed into one another, and having all of those combined in that integrity space is just going to create a more sustainable and a stronger step forward to help keeping sport clean and safe for all.
But I guess it comes down to ethical decision-making in the end, doesn't it? Whether it be anti-doping, whether it be behaviour in sport. It's not just about anti-doping per se, as we've just mentioned.
No, yeah, you're right. And, that's why, we've had this education conference, and, underlying that is values-based education. You want to be getting to children and teaching those values so that they can make good choices, as they move through that athlete pathway. And yeah, the sooner you can do that, the better.
Where do you go now? And obviously finishing up after 10 years with WADA on the athlete committee. What are you going to do with yourself?
It's going to give me a lot more free time. WADA does take up a lot of my time. And as a result of, being on WADA, I'm also chairing Drug-Free Sports Athlete Committee. I'm on the NZOC Athlete Commission. All of that's going to finish for me at the end of the year. And hopefully, I love sport, and I'm sure something will come up for me to still be able to contribute.
Do you see yourself moving into the broader integrity aspect of sport?
I really don't know. We'll see, one door closes and another opens, and we'll see what happens in the near future. I'm currently running to be the mayor of my city back in New Zealand, so we'll see if I get that. That's obviously going to take up an enormous amount of time. But if I also don't get that, it does mean that there's other opportunities in sport, whether that's in the integrity space or governance space, we'll see.
In terms of WADA, you've got every confidence now that the framework is in place for athletes to be more heavily involved, because I know that we're seeing the progress and the shift and the reform, etc., continue. You're confident that we are in the right direction?
I'm never 100% confident. Nothing's ever perfect, and I think we have to continue to work on it. So it's an ongoing process. I keep on saying that, being an athlete-centered organisation isn't, it isn't the end of the sentence. It's a process. And I think WADA and the new Athlete Council that comes in next year is going to have to carry on pushing that. I would like to see WADA and anti-doping, being much more athlete-centred. I think the door's open, and I think the new council will be able to walk through that door. But I think, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done in the future.
So when you say more athletes involved, what, on the executive, or how far do you go with an athlete being involved? Because I guess, if athletes are totally running WADA, it can be seen that it's favouring athletes too much. So there needs to be a balance, doesn't there?
Yeah, and I think it's about striking that balance, correctly. And I think the balance hasn't been correct in the past. And I think, there's good reasons for why WADA was set up the way WADA was. And, this athlete representation has sort of come as a result of WADA existing in this space. So now we're sort of trying to add on athlete representation to the existing structures that WADA was set up as a partnership between governments and the sports movement. And, ideally, I would like to see us have, sort of a one-third partnership around clean sport and around the governance table, especially when it relates to the foundation board. But, small steps, we've got, the chair of the new WADA Athlete Council will be on the executive committee. We'll have 2 seats on the foundation board. That's in addition to the IOC, AC members that are there. So, yeah, moving in the right direction, but always more to aim for. In
terms of anti-doping, where do you think improvements can be made? And I guess where I'm coming from, but like athletes with whereabouts, for instance, times there is confusion about that. There is confusion about supplements, low-level returns on positive tests. There are a number of issues that do cause angst in the athlete community. So is there room for improvement in that area, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think one of the things is, understanding the issues. And then once we understand the issues, we can obviously try to improve them. And anti-doping is quite complicated, and things are the way they are for a lot of good reasons often. And we have quite a set structure that applies. And sometimes it's about having flexibility within that. So whether that's like if you take inadvertent doping, or an athlete that's taken a supplement and that's tainted, we need to be looking at that. And we know that the rules are the rules at the moment, but how can we improve them to, add in flexibility? How can we, make sure that contaminated supplements or, common contaminants have a threshold, so we aren't catching athletes unintentionally? How can we provide more support to athletes in those situations, whether that's legal aid or wellbeing support? So there's a huge array of things. Like any topic that you pick up, it can be improved. Like we have to constantly improve.
Another aspect, of course, is that you look at Australia, very stringent anti-doping procedures, yet it's not the case everywhere. And so Australian athletes say, well, while we love the level playing field, how come we're being targeted where athletes we're competing against hardly get tested at all?
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest thing that athletes come to us and ask us about is, why am I having to follow every single rule and be tested all the time, and yet my competitors aren't? And so there's a lot of work that WADA does now on making sure that, that global system is working better, whether that's, lifting up the levels of national anti-doping organisations or regional anti-doping organisations, or working with sport to make sure that, they're testing through their levels of sport too. But it's, again, you have to constantly make sure that it's working and getting better.
What about you, Bron? What sort of questions do you get asked by, not only, I guess, in your 3 sports that you cover now as an integrity and complaints manager, but in water polo? What was the biggest bugbear? What were the questions that you got asked?
A lot of it's around the doping control process. So we'd finish a game and you'd be approached, and then it'd be, you can't warm down, or there was unclear whether you could shower. And when you're in chlorine, and it can be quite abrasive to your skin, and not being able to shower for potentially hours is quite damaging. So it's trying to, not comply with the restrictions in place or the regulations in place, but also having that flexibility to maintain what you need to do as an athlete. I know myself, I was in doping control and I had a partial sample and my chaperone left and I was there by myself and I didn't know what to do because I was like, do I leave the room because then I'm leaving doping control or do I? And luckily I had my phone close by, so I called our doc who came in and usually they'd be there, but we had injuries, so there was other things that she had to deal with, but it was we were overseas and it was quite intimidating not knowing what to do because you were potentially in violation because you weren't in sight of the chaperone. And so there's things like that that happen, that pop up constantly when we're on tour or overseas or travelling. So we're lucky here in Australia, we have a pretty good process and it's the same pretty much whenever you get tested. So our girls have a base knowledge and when they go overseas they see that difference, but plenty of stuff still come up about supplements, about medications, especially buying medications overseas, and there's so many questions. I get texts many times, and I've had one of my teammates had to go to hospital and doping control turned up at her house and she wasn't there. She's like, what does this mean? I'll get a sanction. So there's constantly questions coming through, even though it's, they're quite well educated athletes, but it's your life. It's part of your identity that's on the line, and that risk is there, and suddenly it's threatened, and you're left feeling really vulnerable and scared.
Yeah, another aspect, of course, too, is that if you're waiting to get tested and the rest of the team's on a plane going somewhere and you've had that?
Yeah, I haven't had that, but we won a gold medal and it was about 1 a.m. in the morning in Spain and everyone else was leaving and I had to go to doping control and provide a sample, but I was lucky in that mine was relatively quick and there was a Yank there their game was about 4 hours before ours. She was still there waiting to provide a sample.
Yeah, a lot of the things you're talking about there are very much overseas. And I guess Australia, because the athletes still have a voice and a very strong voice, things can change. And you'd hope that like Australia, New Zealand, United States, UK can lead the way in terms of, the expectations of athletes.
Yeah, definitely a rising tide lifts all ships. So the more we can all raise the level and bring everyone with us, I think it'll help keep consistency and clarity across the board.
Yeah. Ben, even though you're leaving, you're still going to have a voice, do you think? You're going to get on social media and call things out? How you're not going to be quiet, are you?
No. Although, I'm not exactly the most prolific social media user. But, I've been involved in WADA for the last 10 years and I've been in athlete representation, I think, for about 16 years. It means a lot to me and, the gains that we've made and the struggles that we've had, I've lived through those. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on things and, reaching out and, we have a whole new athlete council at WADA coming in next year. So I'll definitely be there for them to, say what's happened and provide any guidance or help I can.
Good on you. Thanks very much for joining us, Ben. All the best
in
the future. Thanks very much, Bron.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us on Onside after a highly successful Global Education Conference in Sydney. We'll be back with another episode of Onside shortly.
You've been listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Send in your podcast questions or suggestions to media@sportintegrity.gov.au. For more information on Sport Integrity Australia, please visit our website www.sportintegrity.gov.au or check out our Clean Sport app.